How much do you actually know about what estrogen and progesterone do in your body? Not the reproduction piece. Most of us know that part. I mean, what they do in your brain, in your nervous system, in your gut, your energy, your sleep, your ability to manage stress. Most women I work with, including many who are quite health literate, have never been given a complete answer to that question. And I think that gap is part of why perimenopause is so disorienting. When you do not know what a hormone does, you cannot understand why its decline feels the way it does. Today, I want to close that gap. This is the video I wish every woman had access to before her symptoms started. This is week 3 of our series on hormones and identity. I'm Kira Gibson. I'm a registered dietitian and licensed therapist. Now, my clinical work at Santosha Wellness centers on nervous system regulation, nutritional restoration, and gut health. The physiological foundations that most directly shape how the perimenopausal transition is experienced. This week is the mechanism, the actual biology. So let's get right into it. Now, most of us learned that estrogen was primarily a reproductive hormone, right? And that is true as far as it goes. But estrogen receptors are found in almost every tissue in the body, which means estrogen is actively doing something in all of those places. So let me start with the brain, because that is where most of the symptoms of perimenopause really originate. Estrogen regulates the production of serotonin and dopamine. Those are the neurotransmitters most directly involved in mood, motivation, and feeling connected to your own life. Estrogen does not create these chemicals, but it strongly influences how reliably they are made and how well the brain uses them. Estrogen also supports the hippocampus, the brain region most involved in memory, learning, and that word retrieval that sometimes becomes so hard. It promotes the growth of new neural connections and helps maintain the hippocampus over time. When estrogen fluctuates during perimenopause, all of this fluctuates with it. The mood instability, the brain fog, the word finding difficulty. These are the brain responding to an unreliable supply of a hormone that it depends on. Estrogen also moderates the stress response. It reduces the reactivity of the HPA axis. This is that system that governs cortisol production. Adequate estrogen helps the nervous system respond to stress proportionally and recover efficiently. As estrogen declines, that moderating influence weakens. This is one of the reasons stress feels worse during perimenopause. The nervous system has lost one of its regulators. And estrogen supports mitochondrial function. The mitochondria are the structures inside your cells that produce energy. When estrogen declines, cellular energy production becomes less efficient. This is a direct physiological contribution to the fatigue many perimenopausal women experience. And finally, estrogen is active throughout the gut and interacts with thyroid hormone production. Both of these matter enormously for how the transition is experienced, and both are often overlooked in standard assessments. Now let's talk about progesterone. I think it is the less understood of the two, and its role deserves more attention than it usually gets. Progesterone converts in the brain to a substance called allopregnanolone. Allopregnanolone enhances the activity of GABA receptors. Now, GABA is the brain's primary inhibitory system. Its job is to calm neural activity, reduce anxiety, and help the nervous system settle after it has been activated. In other words, Allopregnanolone is one of the most powerful natural braking mechanisms the nervous system has. And when progesterone is adequate, the nervous system has a significant natural buffer against anxiety and stress reactivity. But when progesterone declines in perimenopause, that buffer weakens. The nervous system becomes more reactive, harder to settle, more prone to being overwhelmed by inputs it would previously have handled without difficulty. This is why so many women describe a shift in perimenopause where emotional regulation that used to feel natural now requires active effort. The biological support for that regulation has diminished. Progesterone also supports the deep, slow wave sleep, the most restorative phase. And when it declines, sleep becomes lighter, less restorative, and harder to recover from, even when the number of hours slept is the same. It has anti-inflammatory effects, and it supports the conversion of thyroid hormones from its inactive to active form. When progesterone declines, all of these functions weaken simultaneously, which is why the transition so often feels like more than one thing going wrong at the same time, because it is. So now that we understand what these hormones do, let me explain why their decline is so disorienting. Now, the most important thing to understand is that estrogen does not simply just fall steadily from a high point to a low one. During this perimenopausal transition, it fluctuates, sometimes dramatically. And research has documented that estrogen levels can vary by several 100% from cycle to cycle during perimenopause. Some cycles, estrogen is relatively high. Some cycles, it drops significantly. There is often no reliable pattern. This is why symptoms also feel so unpredictable. The mood instability, the cognitive shifts, the sleep disruption, the anxiety, they do not track with what is happening in your life. They track with what is happening in your estrogen levels on a given day. And the state of the nervous system, the nutritional environment, and the gut that shapes how severely those fluctuations are felt, a body that is already depleted, already dysregulated, already absorbing poorly, will feel each drop a lot more acutely. So supporting those foundations is what reduces the amplitude of the experience. So what does support that actually addresses this look like? The symptoms of perimenopause are not separate problems that each need a separate fix. The mood, the cognition, the sleep, the energy, the anxiety, the changed sense of self. These are different expressions of the same underlying transition, felt through a nervous system that is more reactive, a nutritional environment that is more depleted, and a gut that is less able to absorb what the brain needs. Supporting the nervous system is where we start at Santosha Wellness, because nervous system regulation directly affects HPA axis reactivity, cortisol levels, and the conditions in which the brain and gut function. When the nervous system is less reactive, cortisol drops, sleep improves, gut function improves, and the nutritional environment for brain health improves. Everything downstream responds. Nutritional restoration follows because the raw materials for neurotransmitter production, cellular energy, and brain structure require specific micronutrients. When these are depleted, the physiological picture worsens regardless of what else is being done. Gut health is addressed because what gets absorbed and what signals reach the brain depends on the gut environment. A compromised gut means even the best nutritional intake does not fully translate into what the body needs. For some women, direct hormonal intervention is also part of the picture. That is a conversation to have with a prescribing physician or gynecologist. At Santosha, we create the physiological foundation that shapes how the transition and any additional interventions are experienced. At Santosha Wellness, this is exactly what we do. Comprehensive whole person clinical assessments and care that look at all of these symptoms together. Now, if you've been watching this series and something is landing for you, the link in the description is where we begin. Now, next week is the final video in this series. We are going to look at what whole person clinical support for this transition actually looks like in practice, what a real assessment finds, and what the work actually involves. This is a very different conversation from anything most women going through this have ever been offered. And I think it changes what feels possible. Now, the full written version of everything I covered today is linked in the description. It includes a section on what helps and why, and 5 FAQ answers I did not have time for here. So I'm excited to see you next week.